Uncle Mark.
Here I am.
You're always there.
Yeah, I'm always like I'm ever present.
Is that how I summon you? If I just say Uncle Mark 3 times, will you just pop up and say, here I am?
Yeah, say Uncle Mark 3 times into a wine glass. And I appear.
Which I often do. So, you know, there are certain conversations that you and I would like to have, but we are not qualified.
That is almost every conversation we have anyway.
We don't, yes. We're definitely not qualified to talk about anything.
Almost anything.
Of value.
Right. Which is why we talk about religion.
Right. Hey, bada boom. But you've brought a friend into our studio.
Yes, as we promise in the preamble of our show, we have experts of all kinds that we like to bring in. And we've brought in studio today a friend of ours who is Tori Williams Douglass.
Hi, Tori.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And we're gonna get to kind of the meat of what this topic is. It's kind of a how-to.
Yeah.
It's a continuation of a couple how-tos.
Yeah. I mean, we need to have lots of discussions. We need to continue a lot. You know, there's much to delve into in this world,
and much to delve into with this particular subject. But our friend Tori is an ex-evangelical from that universe, and we just
sorry about that, Tori.
It's okay. I've had a lot of therapy. It's fine.
Good times, all good times. But let's for those of you who don't know who she is, she's a big presence on Twitter and a lot of fun most of the time there. So, let's talk a little bit about your story before we get into the meat of the matter.
The Tori story,
if
you will.
Oh, I love that. That's so rad. I might have to run with that, actually.
It's yours.
Thank you. So I grew up Portland, Oregon. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My parents, like you mentioned, are, super evangelical, conservative, like political activists actually in Oregon. So I was
what kind of political activists? Like
for conservative causes,
okay.
like in the state of Oregon, which is a lost cause, but
which is great. At least they're not working where it might do some good or some damage or whatever.
Yeah. I'm like, we've got this like blue wall on the West Coast. It's like holding steady. I'm really hoping that sticks.
Yeah.
So my mom was like an anti-abortion activist. In the state, and working with some like national groups in the 1990s to try to get abortion outlawed in the state of Oregon.
Right, sure.
So, that was kind of my background, was just, church all day, every day, basically. Like I was homeschooled and, went to church all the time, wasn't allowed to like read books that weren't explicitly Christian, wasn't allowed to listen to music that wasn't explicit. Like I didn't even realize there was like country music was a thing. Like
I think you're lucky.
Yeah, you did well there. Yeah. There's other things that you didn't manage to get that may have hurt you, but that's pretty good.
So me missing out on all the like 1980s like country music is cool.
I think the country, but if you missed out on like 80s pop and punk and stuff like that sucks.
Yeah, I missed out on everything.
That's less fun.
I didn't realize there were things that you could write songs about other than Jesus.
Right. Right.
So good times.
Now there's another aspect to your growing up that we need to mention so that we can talk about what we're going to talk about.
For context, so I grew up in a mixed race family. Mm-hmm. My dad is black and my mom is white, and so growing up in Portland, I was very much like the odd human out, because that was just, it wasn't unheard of, but like nobody knew what to do with it.
Oh, really?
So when I would, we'd go to swim lessons or like the library, and the other kids be like, "So are you Mexican?" Like they had no frame of reference.
Really? Was it that rare in Portland?
Yeah.
Really?
They had no frame of reference for like who I was. Portland's the whitest major city in the country, so it just wasn't a terribly diverse place.
So you feel perfectly comfortable here in Salt Lake City then?
Oh, absolutely. I was like, I'm home.
Yeah.
So that
we're the whitest non-major city, medium city.
Secondary. I don't know what the classification is, but fuck it. We're white as fuck.
Yeah.
and feeling fine.
Yeah, it's basically white people and the Utah Jazz here. So anyway.
No, I noticed that as soon as I got off the airplane. Actually, I was like, oh, I am right at home.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was like a very weird kind of aspect to my growing up, and this race was kind of a non-issue, right? Like my parents kind of took tried to go the colorblind approach, which doesn't work.
Which is not the same as a non-racist approach.
Oh, no, it's not anti-racist at all. It's just like...
Colorblindness is its own form of racism.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it really is, because it's like, well, it gives you a reason to overlook or not examine like institutional, structural, systemic problems, because everybody's just an individual. And it's also a lie, right? Like, nobody walks into like a meeting with Oprah and is like, what race are you?
Right.
I can't tell.
That's the old Colbert joke.
Yes.
I don't see race, so you're sitting in front of me, but I have no idea what you are. Yeah.
Right. I don't see race. Everyone at my country club tells me I'm white.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that my parents really tried to like, race is not an issue anymore. Like,
wow,
everybody, I mean, like crazy things. Like, I would bring it up like in the car on the way to church of like, do people think that it's weird that we're like mixed? And my parents are like, oh no, like all the white people go and tan because they want to be the same color you are. Which is like.
You're lucky.
And I have no frame of reference for this whatsoever, because literally all of the information in my life has been controlled and like come through a single source, which is like my parents.
Right. So you were in a way you were very isolated with them in that
extremely.
You were homeschooled. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much of a social group outside of your church you had.
Like none.
So
really, I mean, a couple neighbor kids. That was it.
So was your dad the only black person you knew?
Yeah.
Wow.
I didn't have any black friends until I was in college.
That's intense.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So and your parents, it seems to me that what was going on is your parents weren't trying to raise you in a race neutral way. They were trying specifically to raise you not black. Is that right?
Yeah,
They were
I would say that's true. Yeah.
They were, and they prevented you from any connection with that American story,
including, as we were talking earlier, including your dad's family.
Yeah, yeah. So I met my dad's mom one time. Never met his siblings. Never met his dad.
Wow.
Yeah. No, we were very much kept away from like that side of the family. I mean, even like the intentionality of like, my parents met in Europe because my dad was in the army, and like the intentionality of like, well, we're not gonna settle like where my dad's family is. We're gonna settle where my mom's family was, which was in Oregon, which is very white.
Wow.
So
you're dropped into that backdrop. You're dropped into Whiteville. Only exposure to white people, white. And then you go out into the world and discover that there are other people who look very different than white folk, and who live a different experience, which gets us to what we wanted to talk about,
right?
Which is talking to people about, because suddenly there's, as it turns out, even if you're raised to believe that there's that the whole race thing is over and we don't have to worry about it, it ain't.
It's not true.
Yeah.
And it was a fiction, and it was a complete fiction. And even well-meaning people that believe there is the possibility of kind of a race-neutral approach to life and pretend they're operating in that space, that's a fiction. And so kind of what we wanted to talk about today, and we said this was a how-to with our friend Tori, Paige was on last year, our therapist friend, who talked about how to survive Thanksgiving in one piece without too much boat rocking.
Yeah, with your Christian or with your religious relatives,
or your stubborn whatever their fucking stubbornness is, those relatives. Right. And then a few weeks ago, just recently, we talked about confronting religious people in their spaces, if that's something that you need to do, and when that's appropriate, and how you might approach that. And this, I think, is kind of a follow-on to both of those, because we're in a political moment right now where in this country it probably is a time that we start approaching people that we have differences with in our families so a little more directly. And so anyway.
And some of our listeners may have family members, strangely, who are racists.
Here's what I would say. All of our listeners have family members who are racist.
Right.
100%.
100%. So let's get into that subject a little bit. That, the holidays are coming up.
People are going to be talking to their families, and we're following hard on the heels of people taking knees during anthems, and people, and there are plenty of conversations that are going to crop up. Somebody is going to get so mad about something, and
they're going to get a couple drinks in them, and then they're going to feel liberated to talk about whatever that fucking thing
and
is.
Some of our listeners and some of us in this room may want to say something when that subject comes up. So
let's get into it.
That's awkward. That's hard. It's scary.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you're a fan. You're a proponent of this conversation.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I think that like difficult conversations are what move us forward as a society anyway, right?
Yeah.
So I think
is that a
like,
goal?
They're really.
Are we supposed to move forward?
Well, at this point, I think make America great again.
How about stop the backward?
Yeah,
right. Stop the backward.
It's not even forward. It's just stop the fucking
like,
slide.
can we stop moving in reverse?
Where's that hat?
Yeah.
Stop the backward.
Progress has been demonstrated clearly, has a reverse gear.
Make America great ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
For once.
Once. So yeah, I think, if I'm not wrong, Tori, your position is it's more than just you ought to think about this. It is, you really have a moral responsibility to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think like there's something to be said for those survival mode, like just keep your head down, kind of pray for daylight sort of situations. And I absolutely understand and respect those situations as well. But I think that in terms of people with privilege who have, ample opportunity to have like a sit down conversation, in the kitchen, at the dining room table, watching football or whatever, to confront, and I'm not talking about being antagonistic, right? I'm not talking about like, why do you think that like, cops should be able to just kill anyone. You don't have to be confrontational about it. Like these conversations will just, like you said, Mark, they'll just come up.
Yeah. Because literally, like, football will be on TV.
Right.
And
exactly.
Somebody's going to kneel, and that's going to catalyze the whole fucking,
Yeah, totally. And
people will expose themselves in that moment as...
Yeah, they show their true colors, so to speak.
Right.
So, and I think that, this is what I kind of encourage people to do on Twitter. If you have that privilege, right? If you're not in a space where you're just trying to survive to like, till you can get somewhere where you can get out, get on your feet, you don't have to depend on these folks.
Right.
Then yeah, like it's really important to push back on those comments, that mindset. And again, like not in an antagonistic way, I think that it should be done in good faith with the intention of having a productive conversation. But when those comments are made, to be able to push back and say like, what did you say? Why did you say that? Like, what is the problem? And like make people defend their positions very clearly, because you're not going to win every conversation, right? You're not going to win every argument, but like making people go on the record as like, yeah, this is what I think about like kneeling, like it's disrespectful, whatever. And it's like, well, why do you think this is disrespectful? But you're fine with like, somebody wearing an American flag, like on their bikini or whatever,
right. Yeah.
So it's like, who decides what's respect and what isn't? Right. And who decides what forms of protest are acceptable and which aren't? So like, again, having a good faith conversation and using your privilege in that way to push back on these kind of like negative stereotypes and unchallenged mindsets, because, people are living kind of in bubbles, right? It's like there's a lot of projection about like, oh, liberals and safe spaces and yada, yada, yada. But it's like, if you dare push back on like a conservative's worldview, they're going to lose it, right? Because they're so accustomed to being comfortable,
right,
to being unchallenged in specific places,
right.
And when they aren't, that can really rile them up.
I wanted to get back to because we sort of made the claim that it is a responsibility. There's an obligation to have this conversation, and I want to talk about why that is the case.
I think that again, please be safe. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to be homeless, right? Kicked out,
right.
And everyone has to assess these things
exactly
for themselves.
It's not a one size fits all, and I would never try to claim that it is.
But if you're a stable adult,
yes, I think there is a moral responsibility to push back on, if you are able to push back on these kinds of comments, these kinds of mindsets, because they cause demonstrable, quantifiable harm, right?
Just the mindset itself.
Well, these people also vote,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They're the ones that show up, to vote.
Yeah.
Especially on non-presidential election years,
right.
They're the ones showing up at the midterms,
right?
And I think like I said, I think that it's, if you have privilege, and you aspire to allyship, or you aspire to be a decent person, you can't let conversations and comments and these thought processes slide.
Right. And here you are, a black woman sitting in the room with two white guys saying this. Because of your situation, I feel like you would be very quick in those moments to say something, because what choice do you really have?
I don't have a choice.
You don't have a
I'm
choice.
going to defend my existence.
Right. What we're talking about is people like me and Dan, or people who have this massive well of privilege, this massive account of privilege that they may not even know they have, that they don't ever fucking use they don't do anything with it.
Right.
So spend some on doing something like this.
Well, and it's and I get, there's this thing
it's
where
for us to do,
where it's scary because, this is my family. I don't need to rock a boat here. I just want to have a good time and then go home. And if they just make one comment, I'll just let it slide or whatever. But there's good reason not to let it slide.
Yeah, I think so. Because again, it's you're talking about people. First of all, you're confronting people with privilege to start, right? And they're expending their privilege to make life literally harder for
people with less.
Yeah, people of color, the poor, immigrants,
gay people.
Exactly. So they're they're actively working to make life harder for us,
right,
using whatever privilege they have. So I think that, again, like you're saying, you also maybe have this stash of unused privilege that
right,
you can access to kind of push back, to show up, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of folks are used to not having these ideas challenged. And I have to think back to Japanese internment. I have to think back to Jim Crow. And it's that was a bigger deal then, I think. You're having Thanksgiving dinner and it's well, I don't want colored people using my water fountain.
Right.
It's oh, well, I don't want to rock the boat.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's this is dehumanization.
Right.
Right. And
yeah,
you don't want to rock the boat for people's dignity.
You're allowing someone in your family to make an entire group of human beings less than themselves,
and doing it so fucking casually,
right?
Yeah.
Right, with no risk. They're taking no risk to say these terrible things, and if you're at a Thanksgiving or a Christmas dinner or whatever, and there's a whole group of family, what those people are doing in that moment is performative, right? It's a performative, provocative. Why do they kneel? Anything when they say something like that, they're kind of tossing a chip onto the table, and there's a lot of people watching, and so what happens next, I think, is quite important, and you can't let that stand, because the people in that room have to see if they're neutral, if they agree, if they disagree, they have to see that challenged. I fully believe that,
and so. Give us an example of what this can look like. Let's just say that Uncle so and so, not one of these uncles, obviously, because
your racist uncle, which is not.
We're woke
Uncle
as
Mark
fuck over here.
Uncle Dan.
more racist than Uncle Mark and Uncle Dan.
Yeah, even more so than we.
We're all on a journey and we're working on it.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
Say
absolutely.
one who isn't working on it.
Yes.
He's not working on it at all, and he's damn football players should all be fired if they can't just do their job and stand for the flag and respect the goddamn veterans and all the things. What would your version of challenging Uncle? I almost said Uncle Tom.
Uncle Joey.
That was a very fraught moment just then. Anyway,
Kanye. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that those that's a comment that should be pushed back on. For me, one thing that I like, this individual is problematic. So, but I heard Tim Wise one time say that like a good comment when you hear something that you find unacceptable is because oftentimes it'll be muttered or just said like in jest, and
it's a trial balloon, right?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so to just say like, "Oh, what did you say?"
interesting.
Make them repeat it.
Right.
Make them clarify.
Yeah.
And okay, why is this specifically like a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Why is protesting police brutality not okay to you? Like, what about the First Amendment? Because that's what they're going to pull up, right?
Right.
You know, like, or it's like, they, you know, these football players, like, they can protest whatever, like, off the clock. It's like, okay, why does it have to be off the clock? Like, they're being forced into performative patriotism.
Right.
Yeah.
So why is that okay, right? Performative patriotism being required as part of your job. Why is that acceptable?
Right.
But like peaceful protest isn't,
Right.
in that same context, right? And you know, just ask them questions, make them defend their positions, because you're not going to change someone's mind in one conversation.
No.
Right? I mean, especially people who are really digging in right now.
And if you start the argument, if you start the screaming match,
right, that's not going to get anywhere.
it's going to be tricky. I mean, you have the right to do that too if you want to, but just that's definitely not going to make I mean, the goal can't be I need you to be not racist right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like you know, like we've talked about, this is a process, this is a journey, everybody's on it. I know I grew up around only white people. Like I have anti-black bias that I have to check in my own brain, like still.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we were talking earlier, even your black dad
Right.
was keeping you away from black people.
Right.
So yeah, of course that's what you learned. That's what you grew up
Yeah,
with.
exactly. Like I learned white supremacy, that white people were better, that they knew how to dress, how to talk, how to act, how to like make the rules so that we could all live in this civil society. And weren't we all blessed that they did this great thing for us?
You're welcome.
Thank you. Oh.
But getting back to when we were talking about, you know, the screaming match or whatever, you know, look, as we were saying downstairs, you are not responsible for anybody's reaction.
Right. No.
Your responsibility, our responsibility, is to make it clear that behavior is not acceptable to you.
Yeah.
That attitude is not acceptable to you. Mm-hmm. They can still go off and be racist all day. They're going to do whatever they're going to do.
Yep.
They can turn it into a screaming match. But again, I think saying those things, talking about, you know, who gets to protest and which way, for instance, is a provocative act. Mm-hmm. So they've started this situation.
Right.
Right?
They're the ones poking the bear, feeling totally free to do so.
Yes, swimming around in their privilege as
absolute impunity.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so, again, for those of us with privilege to spend some of it saying, not cool, questioning them, and then they're going to do what they want, and it may explode. It may blow up, and you know what? It might fucking be worth it in some circumstances.
Yeah.
Right? It may be okay to ruin a dinner. Mm-hmm. The point isn't that every dinner should be fucking amazing,
right,
and perfect, and everybody just shut up and get along,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, especially I think when you're dealing with issues, like to me, this is like a moral issue, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is my life we're talking about,
yeah,
because I'm at greater risk for all of these systemic issues, right? So it's like, sure, like a cop could come and kill a white guy, and that happens, unfortunately, far too frequently. Right. But it's not, there's not like the racial bias of like, we know by like, you know, because of studies and brain scans, like we know that like racial bias is like literally hardwired into like our neurons because we see so much anti-black imagery.
Sure.
our entire lives in this country.
Right.
And I would have just to point out, I would have no qualms yelling at a police officer. As a white guy, like
you can do that.
If I see a police officer that I think is doing something bullshit, I'll confront him and I'll yell and I'll whatever if I need
make a scene.
if I feel like it.
Yeah, and you can do that because you have enough privilege.
And yet a black guy can just be chilling and then get arrested. You know what I mean? Like
absolutely.
it's an entirely different set of rules.
Yeah, a black guy knows not to make eye contact.
Yeah.
With a cop.
And even that
Right.
won't protect him necessarily.
No, absolutely not.
Like it's a different world.
Yeah, it is.
We need and until that is not the case, we have there is a societal moral
Imperative.
Yeah. There's nothing you can do about it. I'm sorry, we have obligations in this world.
Right, and the point being that people of color and these vulnerable groups in our country are defending themselves every fucking day. It's time
out of sheer survival.
we step up.
Right.
It's time the rest of us step up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And don't rely on your black in-law or
right.
Asian relative to do the fucking heavy lifting in this circumstance.
Right.
It's on us.
Yeah.
Who are not really at risk in the same ways.
Right. And I think it's important to point out too, because people would ask this all the time. It's like, oh, what would you do if you were alive during the civil rights movement or whatever? It's like, well, here's your chance.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
You're alive during now.
Yeah.
So, have at it. Let's see what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So it's like, ask yourself that question, because I think a lot of the time people with privilege think that they would do the right thing. But then when it comes right down to it, when it actually is going to cost you something, even if it's just a ruined meal and like everybody's fine, the next weekend.
Right.
I think that to be able to to look yourself in the eye, honestly, and say I didn't use a small portion of my privilege to stand up for oppressed people, or to stand up for the rights of black people, or
Right.
whatever the situation is, whatever conversation it is that comes up.
Well, and there's also this important thing about the visibility of this idea. You know what I mean? Like, one of the things that has been so important in our society is when gay people decided they needed to be visible.
Yeah.
They needed to come out of the closet. You know what I mean? And once they started talking, and once they started saying, look, there are gay people that in your neighborhood, in your family.
And took great risk.
At tremendous risk for themselves.
Yeah.
Things started changing slowly for gay people, and now everything's totally fine for them. So
Everything's fine.
So, the visibility of these opinions, me as a straight white man, if I can, just in a moment when someone feels comfortable saying some bullshit racist thing to me, if I can just say, I'm really not okay with that.
Yep.
And that will make a difference. That will get them thinking differently. That will get them, even if they don't give up their racist views or whatever, it changes how the world works.
I would say also that it's to me, it's less about that person you're directly confronting than it is about the people watching.
That's true too.
That's seeing you're taking a stance and being decent and taking a risk, even if it's trifling. You're taking a risk to do something that's right. And I want to talk just a second about how the civil rights movement has been kind of airbrushed and adapted to kind of white comfort in this country. Like this white sainthood of Martin Luther King Jr. And don't forget that as great a man as he was, what he did was make people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What even the most peaceful warriors in any of these rights movements did was make people uncomfortable, right? They sat at the wrong lunch counter. They drank from the wrong fountain. They did.
Yeah, they sat in the wrong seat on the bus.
That's right.
And it's like, okay, well, this is the peaceful protest that we're supposed to aspire to.
Right.
How is that different than what Colin Kaepernick and these other football players are doing? You say you want peaceful protest, right? You say you don't want people shutting down the freeways, which, the civil rights activists shut down the fucking freeway.
Right.
Yeah.
That's been scrubbed. There were riots, there were protests. That kind of gets scrubbed out of the history books.
Yeah.
And peaceful protest it means non-physically violent protest. It doesn't mean that you have peace at the meal. It doesn't mean that you have calm, that only calm will.
It means
will do.
nonviolent. It doesn't mean non-confrontive.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so don't
I think
forget.
we conflate those two, right? Like
Right.
we conflate like having a peaceful meal with like, somehow like I don't know. We kind of aspire to this like, well, I can't if there's any conflict or any tension at all, then it's not peace. And it's like, well, that's a false peace.
And let's remember that again, the person who makes this comment, the person who says the thing, the racist thing, the whatever thing, that's the person who has broken the peace.
Yes.
Yes.
It is not you.
Yes.
Right.
That's the person who has done the first violent act.
Yeah.
And it is a psychic violence.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
do that. So defense of yourself and of the people, of people that you care about,
and that you may not even know.
even if you don't know them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, caring about humanity is caring.
Right.
And and defense of those people is not
Is not a violent.
is not committing a violent act.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm circling back to the civil rights movement. That was derided as violent and
Right.
inflammatory, right? Because and white America, the majority of white America, you can go back and look at the polling on this. Like they were like, what are these people complaining about?
Right.
Yeah.
We're like everything's fine. Like everything that we see is fine. It's great.
They've
Like,
got their own
let's-
colleges now. They can do anything they want.
Exactly. And I think that like there's a lack of empathy, there's a lack of understanding, but I think that when you look at this moment where we are right now in the historical context and like doing some comparison, it's like the sentiment is basically identical, right? Like the civil rights movement, like I think 1 in 3 white Americans approved of the civil rights movement.
Wow.
And it turns out 1 in 3 white Americans approves of like Black Lives Matter existing.
Wow.
So I mean, it's like the parallels don't stop. Like they just kind of go on forever.
Right.
And the narrative, like the lines that like people, like the people that are opposed to these movements use, like they're exactly the same as they were in the 1960s. Like 2018.
Right.
They're using the exact same lines that they were using on Dr. King and Malcolm X.
Right. These are comfortable people with privilege wanting to dictate the terms of how vulnerable groups engage for their rights. They want to say, why do you have to do it this way?
Yeah, exactly.
Why do you have to kneel? You're too loud. You're too quiet. You're too in our face.
Here's what we'll do. We'll create a small little room over here
Right.
that you guys can yell and scream and be all mad about your race things.
Yeah.
And we'll do and then bring us the minutes of it.
Yeah.
And we'll sort of scan that. briefly.
Yeah. The comfortable don't get to dictate how people fight for their rights.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think all we're saying is you don't have to punch Uncle Joe in the nose. You just
Please-
have to
please don't do that.
You just have
That's
to make
assault.
him uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yes. Please let's not.
Let's avoid assaulting other human beings.
How about this? Why don't we just say make racism uncomfortable?
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah. Yes.
Just make it fucking uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
We've solved that.
we've
Thank
solved racism on the How to Heretic
Moving
Kids.
on.
She knows our show.
I think Tori may be a fan. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
not- I don't want to give away the game, but
Okay. Well, kids, this has not ended racism, but this has been a delightful conversation. Tori, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, you
and-
guys are so awesome. I'm
and
so happy right now.
and if people want to find you out in the world online, where do they look for you?
Oh yeah, on the interwebs. So I'm usually can be found on Twitter at Tori Glass. I'm also on Instagram occasionally. I posted a picture of me and Brigham Young. It's very close to my heart. I'm waiting for him to come down off that statue and blood atone me for existing. And also, I'm at toriglass.com if you want to check out like some of the essays that I've written. So yeah,
Great.
Cool. Well, thank
Awesome.
you so much for sharing this time with us. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you guys.
All right.
You're the best.
Bye.
Moving on.
Bye.